The candles were still burning. Edmund Ashworth stood at the altar, unmoving. The bride was not coming. The scandal spread like ink through the congregation, and in the back he saw Clara Ashby.
The candles were still burning. 300 white tapers in the nave of St. Edmund's Cathedral, lit at dawn to honor what was supposed to be the grandest union London society had witnessed in a decade. They were still burning when it all fell apart, still casting their amber glow over silk gowns and powdered wigs, and the carefully composed faces of people who had come to witness a triumph and stayed to witness something far more interesting, a catastrophe. Edmund Ashworth, 8th Duke of Blackmoor, stood at the altar. He had not moved in 4 minutes. The priest had stopped reading. The string quartet had stopped playing. Even the candle flames seemed to pause, guttering in the collective held breath of 300 witnesses. The smell of white roses, warm now in the heat of too many bodies packed into too small a space, drifted over the cold stone floor like a funeral perfume. The bride was not coming, but it was not that simple. It was never that simple with people like Lady Cecilia Vane. No, she was here, in this very building. She had been here 30 minutes ago, when her maid had helped her into her veil. She was here now, just not at the altar. She was in the library, off the east transept, in the arms of a Viennese diplomat named Count Aldrich Rathman, who had been invited to this wedding as a guest of the Crown's Privy Council, and who had, it turned out, been rather more than a diplomatic acquaintance to Lady Cecilia for the better part of a year. 2 members of that same Privy Council had walked in on them by accident, looking for the vestry. In the 30 seconds that followed, the information moved through St. Edmund's Cathedral, the way ink moves through water, silently, completely, irreversibly. Edmund Ashworth heard it from his best man, Lord James Hartwell, who leaned in close and spoke 3 short sentences that rearranged the entire architecture of Edmund's future. For a long moment, the Duke of Blackmoor simply looked at the candles. Then he turned to face the congregation. 300 people stared back at him. He could see them calculating who would move first, who would exploit this, how quickly the news would reach the clubs and drawing rooms and morning papers. He could see the hunger behind their polished expressions. London society did not invent cruelty, but it had certainly refined it into an art form. He looked, without meaning to, at the back of the nave. There was a woman there he had not expected to see today. Small, chestnut-haired, in a plain blue dress that cost approximately 1/10 of what any other woman in this cathedral was wearing. She was holding a small leather-bound book against her chest like a shield, standing very still in a way that suggested she had been trying to leave and had not quite managed it. Clara Ashby, his ward's governess. She was not supposed to be here. She had brought Thomas to the cathedral for the occasion. The boy had begged, and Edmund had permitted it, but she should have remained in the vestibule, or departed once the ceremony began. Instead, she stood at the very back of the nave, grey eyes wide and fixed on him, and in the middle of the worst moment of his adult life, Edmund Ashworth had the strangest, most inconvenient thought of his career. She is the only person in this room who looks sorry for me rather than entertained. He held her gaze for precisely 3 seconds. Then the Duke of Blackmoor did what he had been trained since boyhood to do. He made a decision. Before we go any further, stop for just a moment, because Edmund Ashworth just heard 3 sentences that collapsed 7 years of work in under 10 seconds. He is standing at an altar surrounded by 300 people who are already calculating how to use this against him. And he has just looked, without meaning, to at the one person in that cathedral who is not entertained by his destruction. He has not made his decision yet, but you already know something is about to happen. You felt it. That pull, that of course it's her, that is exactly why you are here. This channel is built for people who believe the best love stories begin in wreckage. If that is you, if you felt something shift when Edmund's eyes found Clara at the back of that nave, hit subscribe right now so you never miss the moment a story like this one begins. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know how far Edmund's worst morning is traveling now. He is about to make a decision. Let's go back. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world. This channel is built on your presence, your energy, and your heart, and it is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at something in you, if you are already leaning forward wondering what Edmund is about to do, please hit that subscribe button right now, smash that like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you and find out just how far our story is traveling. Now let us get back to the cathedral, because Edmund Ashworth is about to make a decision that will change everything. St. Edmund's Cathedral, London, the morning after. The cathedral was empty now. The candles had burned down to stubs. The white rose arrangements along the pews were already beginning to soften at the edges, petals loosening in the morning chill, as though even the flowers had grown weary of pretending everything was fine. The cold stone floor held the night's frost in its cracks. Someone had left a pair of pale gloves on the end of a pew, a guest who had departed in such haste that she had forgotten herself entirely, which seemed right. Yesterday had been that kind of occasion. Edmund Ashworth arrived at St. Edmund's at 7 in the morning before any other soul was there, and walked the length of the nave alone. He did not pray. He had tried prayer at 14, when his father had lost the 4th Blackmoor estate at cards, and at 19, when the 5th had followed. He had concluded that God either was not listening or had decided the Ashworth family required a particularly thorough education in consequence. He walked instead, counted his steps, breathed the smell of old stone and extinguished wax and the faint ghost of too many perfumes pressed together the afternoon before. He was 32 years old. He had rebuilt the Blackmoor fortune from near nothing, repurchased 2 of the lost estates, negotiated a crown land treaty that should have secured the duchy's northern holdings for 3 generations. He had done all of this through 7 years of relentless, grinding, occasionally ruthless work. He had sacrificed a social life, several friendships, and more sleep than any physician would consider advisable. He had acquired Lady Cecilia Vane as his betrothed because she was Lord Vane's daughter, and Lord Vane sat on the Crown's Trade Commission, and the Blackmoor Northern Estates depended on that commission's goodwill in a way that had kept Edmund awake more nights than he cared to count. He had not loved Lady Cecilia. He had not pretended to love her. They had both understood the arrangement perfectly, which was perhaps why her betrayal stung in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with pride. She had looked him in the eye and made promises she had no intention of keeping. He did not forgive that. He stood at the altar and looked at the spot where the priest had stood. And then he looked at the back of the nave, because that was where his mind kept returning, to the woman in the blue dress, to the grey eyes. He had already decided. He sent for her at 8 o'clock. Clara Ashby was in the middle of teaching Thomas his geography lesson when Edmund's footman appeared at the schoolroom door. "His Grace wishes to speak with you, Miss Ashby, regarding Master Thomas's lessons." Thomas, who was 8 years old and possessed of the preternatural intelligence common to children who spend most of their time listening to adults who believe they are not paying attention, looked up from his atlas. "Is Uncle Edmund angry?" he asked. "His Grace is not angry," Clara said, although she had no way of knowing this, and the footman's expression suggested he had no intention of offering an opinion either way. "He simply wishes to discuss your progress." She smoothed her dress the same blue wool she had worn yesterday, because it was her best, and she had not thought to change it, and followed the footman downstairs. Blackmoor House was a Georgian townhouse on Grosvenor Square, all high ceilings and dark wood panelling, and the particular quiet that belongs to houses where the family has learned to move without disturbing anything. Clara had lived here 11 months. She knew which floorboards creaked, which rooms smelled of coal smoke, and which smelled of old paper, where the good candlesticks were kept, and where the broken ones lived. She knew that the Duke of Blackmoor took his coffee black and bitter, that he could not abide mushrooms, that he read until 2 in the morning, more nights than not, and that he was kind to Thomas in a way that he was clearly not accustomed to being, as though kindness were a language he had to translate before speaking. She did not know him, but she knew more than she let on. The footman delivered her to the study. Edmund Ashworth stood at the window, stood, not sat, which meant whatever he was about to say was too serious for the comfortable performance of its with his back to her, and his hands clasped behind him. He was wearing dark wool, no cravat yet, a coat that probably cost more than her yearly salary. She noticed that his shoulders were very straight in a way that was not relaxed, but was trying to look it. "Miss Ashby," he said, without turning. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Your Grace." He turned then. His face was the same as it had been yesterday at the cathedral, composed, controlled, giving almost nothing away, except that around his eyes there was something that looked very much like a man who had not slept. "I expect you heard what occurred yesterday," he said. Yes, Your Grace. I am sorry, are you?" It was not quite a question. He looked at her steadily. "What are you sorry for, specifically?" Clara paused. This was a test, and she understood that. "I am sorry that you were placed in a position that was not of your making. I am sorry for the embarrassment, which was not deserved, and I am sorry for the practical consequences, which I imagine are considerable." His expression shifted by a fraction. "The practical consequences," he repeated. "Yes, that is the correct word for it." He crossed to his desk and sat finally, which somehow made the air in the room heavier, rather than lighter, Miss Ashby. "I asked you here because I have a proposal to put to you, and I wished to do so before the day progressed and the city's gossip machinery made certain things impossible." Clara said nothing. She kept her hands still. Her heart was performing something irregular, but she had practiced stillness for years. "I intend to marry today," Edmund said. "This afternoon, if possible. I have already obtained the license. I have paid the witnesses. The church is at my disposal, since I have, after all, paid for the flowers." The pause that followed was considerable. "What I require," Edmund continued, his voice perfectly level, "is a bride." Clara looked at him. He looked back at her. The coal fire cracked. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. "You are proposing to me," she said. Her voice was steady. She was quite proud of that. "I am offering you an arrangement," Edmund said carefully. "There is a distinction. What I require is a wife the crown cannot object to. Someone without political ambition. Someone who has no reason to use this marriage as a lever against the duchy. Someone, frankly, who will not betray me the moment it becomes advantageous." His jaw tightened briefly. "You are Thomas's governess. You have been in this house 11 months. You have had ample opportunity to cause damage, and have chosen not to. That is, in my experience, an extraordinary quality." "You are choosing me," Clara said slowly, "because I have not yet hurt you. I am choosing you because I believe you will not." His eyes were dark and direct. "But I will be honest with you, Miss Ashby. This is not a romantic gesture. The Crown alliance I spent 7 years building depended on the Vane connection. With Lady Cecilia gone, Lord Vane will almost certainly challenge the land treaty that protects the duchy's northern holdings. There are 300 tenant families on those estates. Their livelihoods depend on the duchy's territorial integrity. I cannot afford to look destroyed. I cannot afford to give the Vane faction time to marshal their legal challenge before I have demonstrated that I have recovered and moved forward." Clara stood very still. In exchange for agreeing to this marriage, Edmund said, "I will clear your family's debt in full. Your brother Owen's training fees, I understand they are 3 months in arrears, and that the physician he apprentices under has been patient, but not indefinitely so. I will fund his medical training through qualification, and I will provide you with a settlement that makes you financially independent, whether this marriage lasts 1 year or 20. The room was very quiet. Clara's mind was doing something she would later describe, in the privacy of her own thoughts, as a perfectly cold accounting. She was setting figures against each other with the precision of a woman who had learned mathematics from necessity rather than recreation. On one side, the debt, Owen's future, her own lack of prospects, the precariousness of a governess's position in a world that could dismiss her without reference if she displeasured. On the other side, a title she had not asked for, a man she barely knew, the opinion of every person in England who believed that a duke marrying his governess was either a scandal or a joke. And underneath all of that, something she was not quite willing to look at directly. She had seen him at the cathedral. She had watched him stand at that altar and hear the news and hold himself together with the visible effort of a man holding a cracking wall in place with both hands. She had seen, in the 3 seconds he had looked at her, something that was not pity and not strategy, something that was simply recognition. 2 people who had spent their whole lives not being seen, looking at each other across a cathedral full of people who were only interested in the disaster. "You are giving me a genuine choice," she said. "Yes." Edmund's voice was quiet. "I am. I would prefer you understand that clearly, because it makes what comes after cleaner for both of us. And if I say no, then I will find another solution. You will keep your position here. Thomas will keep his governess, and we will never speak of this morning again." Clara looked at the window. The October sky over Grosvenor Square was the particular grey of a London morning that could not decide whether to rain. A carriage clattered over the wet cobblestones below. Somewhere, a church bell was beginning its 9 o'clock count. "Yes," she said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. "Yes," Edmund repeated. "Yes, I will marry you." She met his gaze. "But I want something else as well, beyond the financial settlement." His eyes narrowed very slightly. She had surprised him, and she could see he was recalibrating. "Name it." "I want to be treated with courtesy, not performance. I have no interest in being costumed and paraded, but courtesy. Honesty. If this arrangement has terms, I want to know them. No unpleasant surprises." Edmund studied her for a moment. Then something moved across his face that she might, in another context, have called respect. "Agreed," he said. He stood, crossed to his desk, and extended his hand. Clara Ashby, governess, daughter of a late and indebted solicitor, elder sister of a physician's apprentice, whose entire future rested on her next decision, reached out and shook the hand of the Duke of Blackmoor. The coal fire cracked. The deal was made. They were married at 3 o'clock that afternoon in the same St. Edmund's Cathedral with the white rose arrangements still in the pews and the candle stubs replaced with fresh tapers at Edmund's instruction. The witnesses were Lord James Hartwell, Edmund's best man from the day before, who accepted the situation with the equanimity of a man who had known Edmund for 20 years, and long since stopped being shocked by him. And Mrs. Dorothy Hale, the housekeeper of Blackmoor House, who wept quietly and consistently throughout. Thomas was there because when Edmund had returned to the house and told him there was to be a wedding after all, the boy had looked at Clara with an expression of such concentrated satisfaction that it was quite difficult to interpret as anything other than I knew it. The ceremony was brief and composed. Clara stood straight in her blue wool dress she had not had time to change, with the cold stone of the cathedral floor seeping up through the thin leather of her shoes, and she said the words when the priest asked for them, and Edmund Ashworth, 8th Duke of Blackmoor, did the same, his voice steady and his eyes fixed on the middle distance with the particular discipline of a man choosing consciously not to let himself feel anything. Thomas slipped his small hand into Clara's when it was done. She held it tightly, which was perhaps the most honest emotion of the afternoon. Outside the cathedral, as they descended the steps into the cool October air, Edmund helped her into his carriage with a formal courtesy that was punctiliously correct and entirely without warmth. She settled into the velvet seat and listened to the carriage wheels on wet cobblestone, and watched the city pass the window, and understood, with a clarity that was almost refreshing, that she had just made the largest and most irrevocable decision of her life, for reasons that had nothing to do with love. She had made it for Owen, for safety, for the chance to stop being afraid. Those were good reasons. She kept telling herself that. Thomas, sitting beside her, looked out the window for a moment, then turned and said, in the thoughtful tone he used when he had been observing something for a while, "You did not look like you were frightened. You looked like you were deciding something." Clara looked at him. "I was," she said. "Did you decide the right thing?" She looked out the window. Blackmoor House was coming into view. "I hope so," she said, and in the seat across from them, the Duke of Blackmoor said nothing, but his eyes, just for a moment, dropped to his new wife's hands, where they were folded in her lap, very still, very controlled, and Clara had the distinct and unsettling impression that he was thinking exactly the same thing she was. She has just married a duke she barely knows, for reasons that have nothing to do with love, in the dress she wore yesterday, with a child's hand in hers as the only warmth in the room. And yet, did you notice what Thomas said to her in the carriage? You looked like you were deciding something. He is 8 years old, and he is already the most perceptive person in this story. If you are already watching these two people the way I think you are, if you are already counting the distance between them and wondering when it closes, this is the moment to subscribe. Because what comes next is the part you will want to tell someone about. Like this video if Clara already has your whole heart. She has earned it. Now let us go inside Blackmoor House, because the first week of this marriage is about to begin, and neither of them is remotely prepared for it. Blackmoor House, Grosvenor Square, the first week. The house had a particular silence at night. Not empty silence, the silence of a house that was full, staffed, and functioning, but in which every person had agreed, without discussion, to make as little noise as possible. The coals settled in their grates. The clocks ticked. Somewhere in the upper floors, Thomas occasionally coughed in his sleep, a small sound that Clara had learned to distinguish from the various other small sounds of the house. She lay in the Duchess's bedchamber, a room she had passed 12 times in 11 months without ever expecting to sleep in, and listened to the house, and thought about what she had agreed to. The Duchess's rooms were in the east wing. The Duke's were in the west. Edmund had made this clear in his usual fashion, which was to say nothing at all about it, while making it unmistakably plain. The rooms had their own entrances, their own fireplaces, their own sitting areas. They connected, she had discovered, through a locked door in the dressing room, and the key to that door was apparently not going to be mentioned by anyone. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. Clara was a practical woman. She had been a practical woman since the age of 17, when her father's financial difficulties had become undeniable. And she had stopped waiting for circumstances to improve and started adapting to them as they were. She did not require warmth from this arrangement. She required stability, and that had been provided. She rose at 6 and began learning the shape of her new life. Edmund's rules were precise and communicated through Mrs. Hale, which Clara found both mildly insulting and utterly characteristic of a man who communicated through systems rather than conversation. Breakfast was at 8, dinner at 7. His Grace worked in his study from 9 until 4, at which point he either received visitors or reviewed estate correspondence. His Grace did not require the Duchess's company at breakfast unless there were guests. His Grace expected the Duchess to be available for social engagements 2 to 3 evenings per week, as dictated by the season's calendar. His Grace had arranged for Clara's wardrobe to be supplemented with appropriate garments by a modiste of his selection. Clara received these communications with perfect equanimity and said to Mrs. Hale that she understood. Then she went upstairs to the schoolroom and taught Thomas his morning lessons. Because Thomas's education had not paused for the social upheaval, and Thomas himself seemed to regard the new domestic arrangement with the calm practicality of a child who had spent much of his life adapting to what adults decided around him. "Is it strange?" he asked on the 3rd morning, without looking up from his Latin primer. "Is what strange, Thomas? Being a duchess, when yesterday you were a governess?" Clara considered how to answer this. "It is different," she said, "but many things are different without being wrong." Thomas considered this with the gravity he brought to all serious matters. "Uncle Edmund was different yesterday too," he said. "He smiled at breakfast. He does not usually smile at breakfast." Clara said nothing because she had not been at breakfast, but she filed this information away with the careful attention she gave to all data about the Duke of Blackmoor, which had been, even before the wedding, more considerable than she had ever admitted to herself. She saw Edmund at dinner on the 5th evening. He was already at the table when she entered, reading a letter, and he looked up when she sat down with an expression that was not quite surprise, and not quite nothing somewhere between them, a fractional shift that she might have invented. "Your Grace," she said. "Your Grace," he replied, which was technically appropriate, and yet slightly absurd, given that they had been married 5 days and lived in the same house. They ate in silence for several minutes. The first course was removed, the second arrived. A footman poured wine. Clara looked at the painting above the fireplace, a Blackmoor ancestor, severe-faced and dark-haired, who bore a marked resemblance to the living Duke, and then looked at her plate. "How is Thomas's Latin?" Edmund asked. "Improving. He has a good ear for it. He should be attempting Caesar by spring. He told me yesterday that Julius Caesar was, and I am quoting directly, a very annoying person who could not stop talking about himself." Clara pressed her lips together against something that wanted to be a smile. "Caesar's Gallic Wars is written in the first person," she said. "I may have neglected to prepare him for that." He seemed personally offended. A pause. He also told me that you argue with the chaplain about theology. There it was. She had wondered when this would surface. Reverend Huxley and I have had several productive discussions, Clara said carefully. Huxley had described you as the most formidable theological opponent he has faced in 20 years of parish work. Edmund's voice was without inflection. He was not, I believe, complaining. Reverend Huxley argues from authority rather than logic, Clara said. He is very good at it, but when someone argues back with logic, he tends to enjoy the engagement. Edmund looked at her directly for the first time that evening. You are not, miss, he stopped. You are not what you present yourself to be in company. I am not sure what you mean, Your Grace. I mean that in the 6 months before our marriage, I observed a governess of impeccable propriety, who appeared to have no opinions stronger than those required by the position. I find I am now sharing a table with someone rather more considerable. He said this without accusation, as a statement of fact, but there was something underneath it that Clara identified slowly as interest. I learned early, she said, that a woman in my previous position has more security if she does not give offense. And now? Now I am a duchess, Clara said. I imagine the security calculus has shifted somewhat. The silence that followed had a different quality to it. Edmund picked up his wine glass, held it for a moment without drinking. It has, he said. Then he looked at the painting above the fire, his ancestor, severe and dark, and something moved in his expression, quickly suppressed. My father's portrait is in the west drawing room, he said unexpectedly. I have considered having it removed. Clara said nothing, waiting. He looked like me, Edmund said, which I find at times inconvenient. He said nothing more. Clara did not press. But she thought about it afterward, about the word inconvenient, and what it meant. For a man to look in the mirror and see someone he had spent his adult life paying the debts of. She thought about it while she prepared for sleep, listening to this house settle into its quiet. She thought about it until the coal in her grate had burned low and the candle on her nightstand was guttering, and then she put it away, carefully, in the part of her mind she reserved for things she was not yet ready to examine. She was not here to understand Edmund Ashworth. She was here to honor an agreement. She kept telling herself that. Thomas served as their unlikely ambassador for the first 2 weeks. He reported to each of them, with great impartiality, information about the other. He told Clara that Edmund had asked whether she preferred roses or lilies. She overheard this conversation, and Edmund had done no such thing, which meant Thomas had fabricated it entirely, possibly as a social experiment. He told Edmund, evidently, that Clara liked to read by the east window in the evenings, because the candle bracket there gave good light, which explained why one morning she arrived in the sitting room to find that the candle bracket had been replaced with a better one. Clara stood and looked at the new bracket for a long time. Then she went to find Thomas. Did you mention to His Grace that the east window bracket was insufficient? She asked. Thomas looked up from his drawing with an expression of absolute, cherubic innocence. I might have mentioned it, he said. Thomas, the new one is much better, he said firmly, and returned to his drawing. Clara looked at the new bracket again. It was indeed much better. She did not mention it to Edmund. But the next time they passed each other in the corridor, and he inclined his head in his usual formal acknowledgement, she held his gaze for a half-second longer than usual, and he, she was almost certain of this, almost smiled. Almost. Then a letter arrived from Lord Vane's solicitors, and the world shifted on its axis, and nothing about the quiet first fortnight seemed to matter anymore. The letter was addressed to Edmund, but Mrs. Hale brought it to Clara. By mistake it had been misdirected to the Duchess's sitting room, and Clara, Seeing the Vane seal and the legal weight of the enclosed document, even through the paper, brought it directly to the study and set it on Edmund's desk without reading it. Edmund read it. He read it twice. Then he set it down and placed both hands flat on the desk and looked at the window, and said nothing for so long that Clara, who had not been dismissed and was not sure whether to leave, stayed standing by the door. "The Northern Land Challenge," he said finally. "Lord Vane has filed it. I am sorry. He has 3 months before the statute allows the Crown Commission to review the claim." Edmund's voice was completely flat. "If they review it under the 1793 statute and find in Vane's favour, we lose 4,000 acres. The tenant families lose their leases. The Northern Rent Fund," he stopped. "It does not matter what they fund. It matters that 300 people's livelihoods depend on those leases." Clara stood with her hands folded. "What can be done?" "I am working on that." He looked at her then, and she saw it, the thing he had been hiding behind control and procedure, and communicated through housekeeper's routine. Not anger, not even worry, something older and quieter. The specific tiredness of a man who has been holding everything up by himself for a very long time and has not yet worked out how to put it down. "Your Grace," she said. "Edmund." His eyes sharpened at the given name. "You have not failed yet," she said, simply, plainly, without comfort decoration. "Vane has filed a claim. A claim is not a verdict." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, "it is not." He picked up his pen. She was almost at the door when he said quietly, "Thank you." She did not turn around, but she carried the word with her down the corridor, and it settled somewhere in her chest, where it had no right to be, and she did not shake it loose for several days. Blackmoor House, 3 weeks after the wedding. The Crown's man arrived on a Tuesday. His name was Richard Pemberton, a titleless, sharp-faced functionary of the Trade Commission, who wore his authority in the set of his shoulders and the deliberate inadequacy of his bow. He had been sent ostensibly to review the estate records relevant to the Northern land claim. In practice, Clara understood within the first 10 minutes of his arrival he had been sent to assess whether the Duke of Blackmoor's marriage was credible enough to complicate Lord Vane's legal manoeuvring. The commission, it turned out, was less interested in legal technicalities than in the social calculus. A disgraced unmarried duke was a weakened duke. A duke with a stable household and a wife who appeared settled and sensible was a harder target. Vane needed Edmund visibly diminished, and a hasty marriage to a governess, unless it looked convincing, gave him exactly what he needed. Edmund had understood this from the beginning. That was why he had moved so quickly. Clara understood it now. She dressed with particular care that morning, in a deep green silk that the modiste had delivered the previous week, and she went down to the drawing room where Pemberton had been installed with the estate ledgers and a cup of tea he had not touched, and she sat beside Edmund and she performed. Not dishonestly. She did not lie to Pemberton exactly, but she had spent 11 months in this house, and she knew its rhythms and its history and its duke well enough that when Pemberton asked careful, probing questions about the nature of the household, she answered with the quiet authority of a woman who belonged there. "How long have you known His Grace?" Pemberton asked, looking at the ledger while clearly listening for her answer. "Long enough to understand his household," Clara said, "and to know that the duchy's management has been exceptional. I would not have agreed to this marriage otherwise." Edmund, seated beside her, said nothing, but his hand, resting on the arm of his chair, shifted very slightly toward hers, not touching, but present, a small, deliberate signal. Pemberton looked at her directly. "The Commission is aware that the original betrothal "The Commission is aware of a great deal," Edmund said, quiet and precise. "That is not relevant to the question of the duchy's northern land rights, which were established by treaty in 1809, and which I will defend by whatever legal means are available to me." He paused. "The Commission would do well to remember that it is a body of advisers, not a court, and that the Blackmoor Duchy's tenant families have considerably more to lose from a politically motivated land challenge than the Commission has to gain from pursuing one." Pemberton's eyes moved between them. Clara met his gaze without flinching. There was a long silence in which the coal fire cracked, and the clock on the mantelpiece marked the quarter hour, and Richard Pemberton, of the Crown Trade Commission, performed a rapid reassessment. "I shall report to the Commission that the household appears stable," he said finally. "Stable," Edmund repeated. "How kind." Pemberton departed at 3 o'clock. Edmund saw him out, exchanged the last of the pleasantries, and then stood in the hallway of Blackmoor House and let out a breath that was long enough and controlled enough to tell Clara precisely how tightly wound he had been for the last 4 hours. She was still in the drawing room when he returned. She had taken off her gloves and was sitting in the chair by the window, the east window, with the good bracket, with her hands in her lap. "You were excellent," Edmund said. "I was honest," she said, "which is simpler. Honesty is not always simple, no. But pretending to be something I am not would have been more difficult. I simply told the truth about what I have observed in this house." Edmund crossed the room and sat across from her, which was unusual. He generally stood or sat at his desk, not in the comfortable chairs by the fire, which seemed to belong to a version of himself he did not often permit. He looked at her with an expression that was still controlled, still composed, but with something behind it that she had begun to recognize as the precursor to actual speech. "You said you would not have married me unless you trusted the household's management," he said. "Did you mean that?" "I meant it was true," Clara said. "You have been a responsible steward of this property and these people. That is observable. You have been observing me. It is part of a governess's education to observe carefully," she said. "Old habits. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, not quite. Not one crossed his face. You are also trained, apparently, in holding your own against Crown functionaries. I was trained in argumentation by Reverend Huxley, who has debated every bishop in 3 counties. Pemberton was a significant reduction in difficulty." Edmund looked at her for a moment, and then he said something that she had not expected. "What do you make of the land challenge?" Clara blinked. "You are asking me?" "I am asking you," he said. "You have heard the summary. You heard Pemberton today." I am a pause, almost imperceptible. "I find I would like a perspective that has nothing to do with legal strategy or duchy politics." She gathered herself. "I think Lord Vane is less interested in the land than in the demonstration," she said. "He wants to show that disrupting your betrothal had consequences, that he has leverage. The land challenge is a message as much as a legal claim. He is saying, 'See what I can do to you.'" Edmund was very still. "Which means," Clara continued, "that what he actually needs from you is a response that makes the message irrelevant. Not a counter-threat, a demonstration that you are not, that the disruption had consequences for him, not merely for you. And how would that be demonstrated? By being exactly what you appear to be," she said. "A man who suffered a setback and recovered from it completely, and is now more settled and more purposeful than before." She looked at him steadily, which, from Pemberton's report, the Commission should now believe. Edmund said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Where did you study?" "I did not. My father had good books. Your father must have been a remarkable man." Something tightened in Clara's chest. "He was," she said. He was also terrible with money, but those things are not mutually exclusive. Edmund looked at the fire. "No," he said quietly. "They are not." The coal cracked. Outside, carriages moved through the early dusk. Thomas came thundering down the stairs from the schoolroom and then remembered himself at the landing and came the rest of the way in the dignified shuffle of a child attempting to walk without running. He appeared in the doorway, looked at Edmund, looked at Clara, looked at the fact that they were sitting in the comfortable chairs by the fire rather than on opposite sides of a vast room, and said nothing, but his expression was deeply, privately satisfied. "Thomas," Edmund said, "come and tell me what you learned today." Thomas came and settled on the footstool between their chairs, and began to talk about Julius Caesar, and the fire burned steadily, and for 30 minutes nothing was wrong with anything. Clara sat and listened, and looked at neither Edmund nor Thomas directly, and thought about how extraordinary it was that the worst morning of Edmund Ashworth's life had resulted in this strange, tentative, firelit thing that was almost a household, almost a family, almost something worth keeping. Almost. She filed the thought away carefully. She was not there to want things. Lord Vane arrived himself the following Thursday, uninvited, at 11 in the morning, with 2 solicitors and the expression of a man who had decided that subtlety had run its course. He was 60, grey-haired, broad in the shoulders, with the particular authority of a man who had spent 4 decades learning that his opinion was the most important thing in any room he entered. He had, until 8 days ago, expected Edmund Ashworth to be his son-in-law. He had not adjusted well to the revision. Clara was on the stairs when the butler admitted him, and she stopped on the landing and looked down at Lord Vane in the entrance hall, and Lord Vane looked up at her, a brief, assessing pause. "The governess," he said, not loudly, but not quietly. Clara descended the remaining stairs at the pace of a woman who is not in a hurry. "Lord Vane," she said, when she reached the hall, "my husband is in his study. I will have him informed you have called." Lord Vane regarded her the way one regards an obstacle that has presented itself in an inconvenient location. "My business is with His Grace. Of course, and, as I said, I will have him informed." She held his gaze. "If you will wait in the blue drawing-room, tea will be brought." She met his eyes long enough to establish that she was not going to be rattled, then turned and gave the appropriate direction to the footman, and went to Edmund's study and knocked. "Vane is here," she said, when he opened the door, "with solicitors." Edmund's expression did not change. "How did he seem?" "Angry," she said, "but managing it. He called me the governess." Something very brief and very cold moved through Edmund's eyes. "Did he?" "I did not respond to it. I thought you might wish to make that response yourself." A pause. "That was the right call. I thought so." She stepped back. "He's in the blue drawing-room. I'll be in the east sitting-room if you need me to." She stopped because she was not entirely sure what she was offering. Edmund looked at her. "To what?" "To provide an additional perspective on whatever he is proposing," she said. "If it would be useful. Or, I will simply be in the east sitting-room reading, and you can deal with him entirely on your own, which you are perfectly capable of doing." His mouth curved barely at the corner. "Stay close," he said, "in case." She stayed close. She did not need to go in. She heard the conversation through the wall of the adjoining room, not clearly enough to catch every word, but clearly enough to hear the tone of it. Vane's bluster, Edmund's precision, the moment about 20 minutes in, when the bluster quietened and the negotiation began. When Vane left an hour later, Edmund came to the east sitting-room. He sat down. "He wants the land rights relinquished in exchange for withdrawing the claim," he said. "In exchange, he will use his commission position to grant Blackmoor favorable terms on the new northern trade routes. Will you agree? Not to those terms. Edmund leaned back. The land rights are not mine to give away. They belong to the tenants in the sense that those tenants have built their lives on that land. I can negotiate the trade terms. I cannot abandon the land itself. Clara turned this over. Then you need a different solution. Yes, he looked at the window. I am working on one. What would it take to remove Vane from the commission entirely? Edmund looked at her sharply. Not through any irregular means, she said quickly. I am thinking of the evidence you mentioned, that Vane permitted the Viennese diplomat, Count Rathman, to attend the wedding. If Rathman had connections to the Austrian trade interests that conflict with the Commission's charter, she watched Edmund's expression shift through several stages. That, he said, slowly, is not a bad line of thought. I am not a legal strategist, she said, but Lord Vane's leverage depends on his position. Without the position, the leverage goes. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed to his desk, picked up his pen, and began to write. He did not explain what he was writing. He did not say another word. But after a moment, he glanced up. Your father's books, he said. Yes, I should like to know more about them. It was not quite a compliment. It was not quite not one. Clara picked up her book and said nothing, and the scratch of Edmund's pen filled the room, and outside the window the October light was already failing. And Thomas appeared at the door at 4 o'clock precisely, and asked if he might come in, and Edmund said yes. And all three of them spent the last hour of daylight in the same room, reading. Thomas, who had been watching this development with the intensity of a general observing successful troop movements, wore an expression of profound, 7-year-old smugness that neither adult acknowledged, which was perhaps the kindest gift they could give him. Blackmoor House, 5 weeks after the wedding. Society came to call on a Wednesday. Not society at large that would come later, when the gossip had age and curiosity replaced scandal, and people decided they needed to form an opinion at close quarters. What arrived on Wednesday evening were 6 specific people that Edmund had invited deliberately. Lord James Hartwell and his wife Helen, who had been at the wedding and were firmly in Edmund's camp. Sir Edward Carey and his wife Ashley, who were connected to the northern estates, and 2 others, a diplomat named Heather Lacey, who had connections useful to the Vane problem, and a sharp-tongued widow named Diane Ashmore, who knew every secret in London, and was consequently someone Edmund preferred to have on his side. It was, in other words, a performance, a very carefully staged demonstration that the Duke of Blackmoor's household was functional. His marriage was real enough to withstand close scrutiny, and his wife was capable of holding a table. Clara understood all of this. She dressed in the deep blue silk and wore her hair pinned in the style the Modesty's assistant had shown her, and she went downstairs to receive guests in her own drawing room. And she was quite deliberately, quite consciously, everything that Edmund needed her to be. She was also, for the first time, rather enjoying herself. Helen Hartwell took to her immediately, which Clara had not expected, but which made the evening considerably easier. Helen was a quick-minded, direct woman who had clearly decided some time in the last month that the Duchess was a person she approved of, and she sat beside Clara at dinner and talked to her as an equal, which Clara found both unfamiliar and surprisingly sustaining. You have impressed James enormously, Helen said quietly during the fish course. He told me about the Pemberton inspection, said you were like a wall he could put his back against. Clara absorbed this. That is an interesting compliment. From James, it is an extraordinary one. He does not use structural metaphors for people he doesn't trust. Helen glanced at Edmund, who was at the other end of the table in conversation with Carrie about the northern routes. He worries about Edmund more than he lets on, has done for years. He was very pleased when I told him. She stopped. When you told him what? That you argue with Huxley, Helen said, with a small smile. It told him more about your character than any social performance could. Clara looked at her own plate. It told him I have insufficient reverence for authority. It told him you have sufficient spine to live here, Helen said quietly. Across the table, Diane Ashby, who had been listening to the conversation between Edmund and Sir Edward, with the focused attention of someone filing information, turned and fixed Clara with a look that was sharp and not unkind. You handled Vane's visit admirably, she said, without preamble. He came here expecting to find a frightened girl who had married above herself and knew it. He found something considerably different. You heard about the visit? Clara asked. I hear about everything. It's practically my occupation at this point. Ashmore's eyes were shrewd. What did you say to him in the entrance hall? He mentioned it. I told him where to wait for tea. Diane Ashmore's expression shifted into something that might, on a less contained face, have been delight. He said, You looked through him as though he were a moderately interesting piece of furniture. She sipped her wine. He was furious. He is not accustomed to being seen clearly by people he has already dismissed. Clara said nothing. You should know, Ashmore said, more quietly, that there are people on the commission who are not Vane's allies, who would be considerably more sympathetic to a challenge of his position if the right information were presented correctly. Clara looked at her. That is useful to know. It was meant to be. Ashmore set down her wine-glass. Edmund has had no one to trust for a very long time. He is not skilled at accepting support. I hope you have patience. I am learning his rhythms, Clara said. That, Ashmore said, is exactly the right answer. After dinner, when the guests had moved to the drawing room, and the conversation had divided along its comfortable lines, Edmund appeared beside Clara near the fireplace. He was holding a glass of wine he had not touched, and his expression was the particular composed blankness he wore when he was containing something. Carrie is willing to extend the northern lease negotiations, he said quietly, enough that no one else could hear. He has been uncertain which way to fall in the Vane dispute. He is less uncertain now. Why less uncertain now? Because he has met you, Edmund said, and because he paused. He told me privately that a man who married his governess because she was the only trustworthy person available is either a fool or a man who sees something others have missed. He has decided, apparently, I am not a fool. Clara looked at the fire. He gave you a great deal of credit for my qualities. He gave me credit for recognizing them. Edmund's voice was quiet. He is not wrong that recognition is the more difficult skill. Clara was silent for a moment. The fire cracked. Voices moved around them. Edmund, she said. Yes. Do you consider this working? The arrangement? A pause. He looked at the fire, better than expected. That is a very careful answer. I am a very careful man. I know. She turned to look at him, really look, which she rarely allowed herself. He was looking at the fire, his profile sharp in the candlelight, and there was something inset of his jaw that she had been translating slowly over 5 weeks, and was beginning to understand. Not coldness, armor. The specific kind that people wear when they have learned that warmth costs them things they cannot afford to lose. You do not have to be careful with me, she said, for what it is worth. He turned his head then and looked at her directly, and for a moment, a single unguarded moment, she saw it. The thing underneath the composure. Something that was almost lonely, almost hopeful. Almost then, Helen Hartwell appeared at Clara's elbow with a question about the autumn charity arrangement. And the moment closed, and Edmund turned back to the room, and Clara followed him back into the performance. But the moment had happened. She did not file it away this time. She carried it, carefully, like something fragile. Thomas, who had been permitted to appear briefly at the end of dinner, had observed the fireplace exchange from across the room. He said nothing. But when Clara looked up, she found him watching her with those old, clear eyes, and he gave a single, slow nod, as though confirming something he had already known. The boy was 8 years old, and Clara was increasingly convinced he understood more about the situation than either of the adults involved. That night, she lay in the Duchess's bedchamber and looked at the canopy above her, and thought about the word recognition. And then she thought about the fact that she was thinking about it at all, and she told herself firmly to stop. And she did not stop, and the clock ticked, and the house breathed around her, and somewhere in the west wing, the Duke of Blackmoor was either sleeping or he was not. She suspected he was not. Blackmoor House and the Hertfordshire estate 6 weeks after the wedding. The fishing lesson happened by accident. Edmund had taken Thomas to the Hertfordshire estate. For the weekend, his habit, Clara had learned, once every 6 weeks. He always said the boy needed country air, which was true, and never said that he needed it himself, which was also true. Clara had come along because Thomas had asked her with such straightforward intensity that refusing had seemed unkind. She had intended to spend the weekend in the estate library. She had brought 3 books. She had opened none of them. Instead, at 2 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon, she had gone looking for Thomas, and found him and Edmund at the edge of the estate pond, in what appeared to be a comprehensive fishing lesson. She stopped on the bank above them. Edmund had removed his coat. He was in his shirt sleeves and waistcoat, which she had never seen. And the effect was disconcerting, not because of anything improper, but because he looked different, less constructed. He was showing Thomas how to cast the line with a patience that was entirely different from the careful, measured patience he brought to adult interactions. This was natural, unperformed. Not like that, he was saying. Slower. The water is not impressed by urgency. It's boring, Thomas said. Nothing is happening. That is rather the point of fishing. The fish will come to you, or they will not. You cannot force it. Why do you like it then? A pause. Because it is the only activity I can think of where doing nothing correctly is the same as doing something perfectly. It suits me. Thomas considered this with his usual gravity. Is that because you have to be perfect at everything else? Edmund was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, fairly much. Clara, on the bank, did not move. She was aware that she was witnessing something she had not been invited to, and she was aware that she should announce herself, and she did not. Clara says that being perfect is exhausting, Thomas said. She said that? She says that everyone is exhausted and pretending not to be, and that it is very wasteful. Did she? Edmund handed the rod back to Thomas. She has a point. Do you like her? Thomas asked, with the directness of a person who has not yet learned that questions are sometimes weapons. Edmund did not answer immediately, long enough that Clara held very still. She is capable, Edmund said finally. That is not what I asked. Thomas, I like her, Thomas said simply. She is the only person who talks to me like I am a real person and not a problem to be managed. Also, she argues with Reverend Huxley, and it makes him happy even when he says it doesn't. Edmund was silent. She makes you different, Thomas continued, casting his line in the wrong direction entirely. You were angry before, not shouting angry, quiet angry, like a house with the windows shut. Now sometimes the windows are open. Clara's throat was doing something inconvenient. You are a very observant boy, Edmund said. Clara says observation is the most important skill, more important than Latin. She makes me practice. Does she? She also says that people who refuse to be helped are just afraid that needing help will cost them something. Thomas tilted his head. I think you are afraid of that. Silence. Cast the line again, Edmund said. To the left this time. Thomas cast to the left. The line settled into the water with a small sound, ripples spreading. Clara stepped back from the bank quietly and walked back to the house through the meadow grass, and sat down in the library with her 3 unopened books, and did not open any of them. She sat for a long time. She was a practical woman. She was here for practical reasons. She had made a practical arrangement with a practical man, and the terms were practical, and the timeline was practical, and she had never in her life been so profoundly, inconveniently, impractically aware of another person as she was aware of Edmund Ashworth. At this moment, she picked up a book. She read the first line 6 times. At 4 o'clock, Edmund came into the library. He was still in his shirt sleeves, which she found deeply unfair. He carried 2 glasses of something warm. Cider, he said, setting one on the table beside her. The estate makes it. It is tolerable. Thank you. He sat in the chair across from her, not at the desk, in the chair near the fire. Thomas caught a fish, he said. Did he? He was extremely pleased with himself. He is learning that patience has rewards, Clara said. A useful lesson. I believe he was also testing a theory, Edmund said, about what happens when I spend time with people. He has theories about me. He shares them freely. I noticed. He has mentioned, Edmund said carefully, that I am afraid of needing help. A pause. He is 8. He is very old for 8. Yes. Edmund looked at his glass. It is not a comfortable thing to be accurately described by an 8-year-old. No, Clara agreed. It is not comfortable to be accurately described by anyone. He looked at her then. He is not wrong, Edmund said, that I am afraid of it. I know, she said. Do you find that frustrating? Given he stopped. Given what you observe. Clara thought about how to answer this. I find it understandable, she said. You have had reasons. I find it. I would like you not to need those reasons quite so comprehensively, eventually, but I am not in a hurry. Edmund was very quiet for a moment. You are a very unusual person, he said. My father always said so. He did not mean it as an insult. Neither do I. He looked at the fire. I found him reading my father's letters once, he said unexpectedly. Thomas, in the study, when he was 6. He had found them in the desk drawer, and was reading them with great concentration. I did not know whether to be angry, or I stood there and watched him read, and he looked up and said, very calmly, Your father wrote very long letters for someone who seems to have had nothing to say. And I sat down and read them with him. For an hour, we didn't talk much, but it was he stopped. It was enough, Clara said quietly. Yes. He looked at her. That is exactly the right word for it. The fire cracked. Outside, a bird was calling across the meadow. My father wrote long letters too, Clara said. After he died, I found several he had written and never sent. To creditors, mostly. Explaining, apologizing. Very elaborate explanations for things he simply could not do. She paused. I burned them. I told myself it was because they were painful. I think actually I burned them because they were too honest, and I was not ready for that kind of honesty about him. Edmund was looking at her steadily. Do you regret it? He asked. Yes. Sometimes less than I used to. She looked at her hands. He was a good man who made poor choices, and loving him didn't require me to pretend the choices were not poor. I think that is the thing it took me the longest to learn. That you can love someone without approving of their failures. That the love and the disappointment are not contradictions. They are both real, and you can hold them both. Edmund said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I could not hold them both, not about my father. I put the love away entirely because it made the rest of it too difficult." "I know," she said, very softly. "How do you know?" "Because you replaced it with duty," she said. "And duty is very well designed for people who have put the love away. It does not require you to feel anything. It only requires you to perform." The silence that followed was the particular silence that happens after someone says true and cannot be said again. Outside, Thomas was coming back across the meadow, still carrying his fishing rod, heading for the house with the satisfied walk of a boy who had caught something. Edmund stood. He crossed to the window. He looked out at Thomas coming across the meadow, and something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, but Clara saw it. The wall not gone, but less rigidly maintained. A single stone set aside. "He is going to want to tell someone about the fish at dinner," Edmund said. "He is going to tell everyone at dinner about the fish," Clara said, at length. "With illustration, probably, given a napkin." Edmund turned, and he smiled, not the almost smile, not the controlled half-curve, but an actual smile, full and real, and it transformed him so completely that Clara, who had been managing herself with great success for several weeks, lost her footing entirely. For one undefended moment, she looked at her book. Edmund went to meet Thomas at the door. The crack in the wall was real. That night, the fire had burned low in the library, and Clara had given up on the books entirely and was simply sitting when Edmund appeared in the doorway at 11 o'clock. He had something in his hand. "A bundle of letters." "My father's," he said before she could ask. "I did not burn them." He crossed the room, stood by the empty chair across from her. "I have read them perhaps 3 times in 10 years. Once when he died, once when I repurchased the first estate, once he stopped. Will you read one with me?" Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. He sat. He opened the bundle. He chose a letter with the deliberateness of someone who had already decided which one, and read it aloud, in a voice that was steady and controlled, and only very slightly not. It was a letter from his father to his mother, written long before Edmund was born, when the duchy was still intact and the fortune still real. It was, despite everything that came after, a love letter. A good one, warm and honest, and far less formal than the period usually permitted, as though the man writing it had decided, just for these pages, to stop performing. When Edmund finished reading, he set the letter down. He was not always the man who lost everything, Edmund said. "No," Clara said. "He wasn't. I spent so long knowing him as the man who failed that I forgot he was also." He looked at the letter. "He was also this. Once. That is something worth knowing," Clara said. Edmund looked at her. In the low firelight, in the quiet of the old house, something had happened to his face. Something had come down. "Clara," he said. "Thank you." For he stopped. Started again. "For being here." Not the arrangement. "For being here." She held his gaze. "I am glad to be here," she said. The fire cracked. Neither of them said anything more. But when Clara went upstairs, she did not need to carry the moment carefully. It was simply there, settled in her, warm and real, and not going anywhere. The wall had a fault line. Everything that followed would come through that fault line. London 2 months after the wedding. The letter from Owen arrived in November. It was brief, careful, written in the neat hand of a young man who had inherited his father's instinct for the oblique expression of difficult things. He thanked Clara for the resolution of the training fees. He said his mentor, the physician Dr. Terence Webb, had been informed of the settlement and had expressed his gratitude. He said he was making good progress and expected to complete his qualification by the following spring. he said, almost as an afterthought, that he hoped she was well, and that the arrangement was manageable. He did not say what he knew. He knew everything. Of course, they were close in the way that siblings who have weathered the same losses tend to become close. But Owen, like Clara, had learned to ask fewer questions than he was actually thinking. I hope the arrangement is manageable. Clara sat with the letter for a while and thought about how she would answer it. She would say that it was more than manageable. She would say that she was. She would pause here, pen hovering that she was well. She did not write the other thing. She folded Owen's letter and put it in the drawer of her writing desk and went to find Edmund, because it was Thursday. And Thursday was the day he reviewed the Vane correspondence with his solicitor, and she had taken to being present for these reviews in her capacity as what, exactly? She was no longer entirely sure. An observer, an additional perspective. The person whose presence seemed to make the reviews go faster and better, possibly because Edmund was less inclined to sit in silence when she was there. She would not examine why that was. She had made a strict private policy of not examining certain things. The solicitor was a precise, beetle-browed man named Geoffrey Thornton, who had served the Blackmoor duchy for 15 years, and who had absorbed the news of the new duchess with the professional adaptability of someone who had absorbed a great many surprises in 15 years. He greeted Clara with formal courtesy, which she returned, and then they all sat down with the latest developments on the land claim. The Austrian connection had proven useful. Edmund's line of inquiry, which Clara had set in motion with her question about Count Rathmann's trade interests, had uncovered, through careful and entirely legitimate channels, that Rathmann had been serving not the Austrian Empire's official diplomatic interests during his time in London, but a private Austrian trading consortium that had direct commercial conflicts with the Commission's northern trade routes. Lord Vane had known this. Possibly Vane had, in fact, facilitated it. Thornton laid this out in the careful, hedged language of a man who understood that the ground was unstable. Edmund listened without interrupting. When Thornton finished, Edmund said, "How public can this be made?" "That depends," Thornton said carefully, "on how much you want to damage Vane personally, versus simply neutralizing his commission position." "What does the Crown want?" Clara asked. Both men looked at her. "The Crown," she continued, "has two interests here, that conflict. It wants the northern trade routes protected. That is a genuine commercial priority. And it wants the Commission to remain functional and untainted by the kind of diplomatic scandal that attending Austrian consortia implies. Lord Vane's position makes both of those things harder, not easier, if this information becomes public." She looked at Edmund. The Crown does not want to be seen to be protecting Vane. It wants an elegant solution. Thornton was looking at her with an expression she had come to recognize as the solicitor's version of grudging admiration. "Her Grace is not wrong," he said. "Her Grace has spent 2 months listening to every conversation in this house," Edmund said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite dry and not quite warm, but occupied the space between them. "The elegant solution," Clara said, ignoring this, "is that the information about Rathmann is presented privately to the appropriate people on the Commission, not publicly, not as an accusation, but as a concern. It gives Vane the opportunity to withdraw gracefully. It gives the Commission the ability to address the issue without a scandal. And it gives you," she looked at Edmund, "the outcome you need without the cost of a public fight." Thornton was quiet for a moment. "I could draft a memorandum," he said slowly, "for Commission Chair Ashley Pendleton, who has, as it happens, had reservations about Vane's conduct for some time." Edmund looked at Clara. She looked back. "Draft it," Edmund said. Thornton departed. Edmund sat at his desk, with his hands flat on the surface, and looked at the window with the expression of a man taking an inventory. "You are good at this," he said. "I am good at looking at problems from the outside," she said. "I have no stake in the political relationships. I can see the shape of the thing more clearly. You have a considerable stake in the outcome." "Yes, but not in the process. The difference matters." She gathered her papers. "The memorandum should note the northern tenant families specifically. The commission is not uniformly mercenary. There are members who would be moved by the livelihood argument if it were made clearly." "I know." He paused. "I should have been making it more clearly from the beginning." "You have been making the legal argument," she said. "Which is correct, but the legal argument and the human argument together are more persuasive than either alone." Edmund was quiet for a moment. "My father," he said, "would never have listened to a word of this. He would have shouted and threatened and made everything worse." He paused. "I spent so many years being the opposite of him that I think I overshot. I became someone who would never shout, but also would never ask for a second view." "You are asking for one now," Clara said. "Yes." A pause. "It is not as difficult as I expected," he said. She looked at her hands. There was a moment here, a threshold, and she was aware of it, with the particular awareness of someone who has been approaching a door and has put their hand on the handle without deciding to. "Edmund," she said. "Yes." She looked at him. He was looking at her with complete attention, not the cautious, calculating attention of the early weeks, but the real kind, the undefended kind, and she was aware of what was in her own face, and was unable to arrange it into something more appropriate. She put her hand on the handle, and then they both heard Thomas come running down the stairs in defiance of all previous instruction, and the door, metaphorical, actual, the moment itself swung just short of open, and instead she said, "Thomas is coming," and Edmund turned toward the study door, and the moment passed. Thomas burst in, covered in what appeared to be mud and triumph. "I found a toad," he announced. "A very large one, by the garden wall. I've given him a name." "Thomas?" Edmund said, with a resignation that Clara had come to recognize as fond. "Why are you covered in mud?" "Finding the toad required some effort," Thomas said with dignity. "His name is Aristotle." Clara caught Edmund's eye, just for a moment, just long enough to see that he was containing the same thing. She was not laughter exactly, but the lightness of people who have discovered, against all prior expectation, that they are happy. She looked away first. The moment had not opened, but it was there. It was real. It was only a matter of time. London 3 months after the wedding. The night of the Hartwell ball was the night they both knew, not separately, simultaneously. Clara had been watching Edmund navigate the ballroom with the controlled ease of a man who moved through London society the way a chess player moves pieces, always 3 steps ahead, always calculating, always performing. She had been matching him step for step, presence for presence, and they had been doing it so fluidly that Helen Hartwell, catching Clara's eye across the room, mouthed something that looked very much like extraordinary. And then the music changed. The string quartet moved to a slower piece, a waltz that had been fashionable 2 seasons ago, and was still in rotation at events like this one, the kind of waltz that required close proximity and had caused a great deal of moralistic commentary in the papers when it was introduced. Edmund turned to Clara as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Would you do me the honor?" he said. It was formally phrased. It was required socially by the occasion. It was entirely expected. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Clara said, "Yes." and Edmund offered his hand. And the difficulty was not the dancing itself, but the fact that she had to be very close to him, and she had been managing the closeness successfully for 3 months. And tonight, for some reason, the management was not working. His hand was warm. She had not expected that she had been braced for the formal cool of a glove. And he had removed his gloves, and his hand was warm and present and very real. She was aware of it with an accuracy that was not useful. They moved through the waltz. He led well, unsurprisingly, with the same controlled competence he brought to everything. She followed. They were neither too close nor too far, and they said nothing at all. And the music went on around them, and the candlelit ballroom went on around them, and Clara was aware, with complete and unhelpful clarity, that she had been in love with Edmund Ashworth for at least a month, and had been refusing to acknowledge it for all of that month, and that the refusal was no longer working. She looked at the middle of his chest, safer than his face. "You are being very quiet," he said. "I am concentrating," she said. "On what?" "On the step pattern. You have been performing the step pattern correctly for 2 minutes. I am concentrating on continuing to perform it correctly." A pause. "Clara." His voice was quieter. She looked up. She should not have looked up. His face was. He was looking at her with the expression that had been growing for weeks, the one she had been not examining, and up close and in candlelight it was entirely unmistakable. She looked away. "This," she said carefully, "is not we agreed. I know what we agreed." "Then we should the step pattern, Clara." He said her name the second time, with the quality of something said after a long decision. Not an interruption, a door. She held very still. "I am aware," he said, "that this is not what we arranged. I am also aware that what has been happening in this house for the last 3 months is not what we arranged, and that pretending otherwise is. I am not good at pretending things I have decided are true, are not true." "What has been happening?" she said, very quietly. "You know what has been happening." The music went on. Around them, other couples moved in their own orbits. "We cannot," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "We cannot do this." "Why?" "Because the class barrier is not merely inconvenient, Edmund. It is, if I become your duchess in truth, the dynasty will be questioned. Thomas's future will be complicated. The very people who have been reassured by this arrangement will turn against it if it becomes real. It is already real. Not publicly, not legally, not in every way that would cost you something." She met his gaze finally, directly. "I will not let you sacrifice the northern tenant families for whatever this is." Silence. "That is a very principled argument," he said. "I have had 3 months to develop it. You have been building the argument. I have been protecting us both." He looked at her. The music was winding toward its close. "What if I told you," he said very quietly, "that the northern situation is better than it was 3 months ago, that Thornton's memorandum is working, that the commission is moving against Vane's position? That is good news. What if I told you that even if the northern land rights were lost entirely, I would not, that there are some things I would not trade for land rights?" Clara's breath was careful and deliberate. "Do not," she said quietly. "Do not say things you have not yet decided are true." "I have decided. Then give me time to decide as well." She met his eyes. "Please." The music stopped. They stood in the middle of the Hartwell ballroom, in the silence between pieces, and Edmund looked at her for a moment, with everything in his face visible, and nothing managed, and then he inclined his head in exactly the formal way that society required, and stepped back, and offered his arm to escort her from the floor. "Time," he said. "Yes, as much as you need." They returned to the other guests. They performed the rest of the evening perfectly. Nobody who saw them could have guessed at anything. Thomas, at home in his bed, was asleep by 9 o'clock, which was appropriate, and dreamed about fish, which had nothing to do with any of this. But Mrs. Hale, who missed nothing, saw Clara's face when they returned and said nothing to anyone, and exchanged a single brief look with Lord Hartwell's butler at the coat-room, and that was sufficient. The almost happened 17 days later. It was late past midnight, and Clara had gone to the library because she could not sleep, and she had reached the end of patience with lying in the dark. She had taken a candle and a book, and she had been reading, or attempting to, for half an hour when Edmund appeared in the doorway. He was not surprised to find her. She was not surprised to see him. He crossed the room and sat in the chair nearest hers, and neither of them spoke, and the fire was very low, and the candle between them cast the room in amber and shadow. She was aware of his presence with every nerve. She was also aware that the awareness was mutual. She could see it in the careful way he held himself, the deliberate quality of his stillness. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is inadvisable at midnight. I have concluded that the class barrier, while real, is not the actual argument you were making at the Hartwell ball." Clara looked at her book. "No? The actual argument," he said, "was that you are not yet certain. That you want to be certain before you act. And I respect that I said I would give you time, and I meant it." He paused. "But I want you to know that the uncertainty is you do not need to protect me from your uncertainty. I can hold it with you." She looked up. He was looking at her with the complete, quiet attention that had undone her at the ball, and the fire was very low, and the candle was between them, and she thought, "If I lean forward now, everything changes." She did not lean forward, but she reached out, and her hand settled on his arm, just the arm, just briefly, and she felt him go still under the touch. Absolutely still, the way a person's goes still when something is both what they wanted and more than they knew how to receive. "I know you can hold it," she said. "Then give me a little more time." A long pause. Then his free hand came up, and his fingers settled over hers on his arm, and they sat like that, not moving, not progressing, just present. Together in the low firelight, with the house breathing around them, and the clock marking the hour, and the whole weight of what they were not yet saying suspended between them. Clara thought, "I am already certain. I have been certain for weeks," she thought. "I am not yet ready to say so," she thought. "This man, sitting here in the dark, holding my hand on his arm, is the best person I know, and I fell in love with him somewhere between the fishing lesson and the letters from his father, and I will not regret it. Whatever it costs me, I will not regret it." She said none of this. She sat in the firelight until the coals were ash, and Edmund's hand stayed over hers, and neither of them spoke, and it was impossibly and exactly enough. Then Edmund said very quietly, "You should sleep." "So should you." "Yes." He released her hand, stood, looked down at her. "Thank you," he said, "for being here." "You keep thanking me for that," she said, "'cause I keep meaning it differently each time." She looked up at him. His face in the last of the firelight was open in a way it almost never was in. Daylight, in company, in the world that demanded things of him. "Go to sleep, Edmund," she said. "The duchy will still be there in the morning." Something moved across his face. Something that was almost a smile and almost something more. He went. The door closed. Clara sat in the dark for a long time. Then she went to bed and lay listening to the house and the certainty she had been holding at a careful distance. Settled around her like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Lady Cecilia Vane. It was addressed to Clara. London 3.5 months after the wedding. The letter was precise. Lady Cecilia Vane wrote in a fine, clear hand that suggested someone who had received an excellent education and had not allowed it to make her generous. The letter was 2 pages. Clara read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the window for a long time. Lady Cecilia's proposition was straightforward. She wished to meet privately. She had something to discuss that pertained to the Vane land challenge and to certain evidence in her possession. She was prepared to resolve the matter in a way that benefited all parties. But she required a conversation before she would commit to any action. She had not written to Edmund, she had written to Clara. Clara took the letter to Edmund. He read it. His face did not change. He set it down. "She wants to negotiate," he said. "She wants to negotiate through me," Clara said, "which suggests she does not trust a direct approach to you, but believes I can be persuaded to work in her favor." "Or," Edmund said, "she is being honest about having information that could help us, and the letter is a genuine opening." "The two things are not exclusive," Clara said. "She may genuinely have useful information and also intend to extract something for it. What does she want?" "She does not say. That is the negotiation." Edmund looked at the letter. "You should not go alone. She will not speak openly if you are present. She wrote to me specifically. Clara, I know her type," Clara said. "She is not dangerous in any physical sense. She is socially dangerous, and she is legally strategic, and she will use any advantage she can find. But she is in a difficult position. Her reputation was as damaged by what happened as yours was. Possibly more so, because society forgives a humiliated duke and does not forgive a bride who was found where she was found." Edmund was quiet. "Let me go," she said. "I will tell you everything, but let me go alone." He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression that meant he was weighing something he did not want to weigh. "You are asking me to trust you," he said. "I am asking you to let me help you." She held his gaze. "There is a difference." A long pause. "Come back before 6 o'clock, he said. Lady Cecilia met her at a tea room in Mayfair that was sufficiently public to be safe and sufficiently quiet to allow a private conversation. She was exactly as Clara had seen her from across the cathedral, beautiful, composed, and considerably more brittle up close than her performance suggested. They sat across from each other with the tea between them and a careful, mutual assessment in the air. "You are not what I expected," Cecilia said. "What did you expect? Someone frightened, someone performing." A pause. "You are doing neither." "I have nothing to perform," Clara said. "What did you want to discuss?" Cecilia set down her cup. "I was wrong about Edmund," she said, without preamble. "I made a terrible mistake, and I have spent 4 months understanding the dimensions of how terrible." She looked at her hands. "I did not love Count Rathman. He was a distraction, an excitement. I was frightened of what marrying Edmund would mean, what my life would become, and Rathman was a way of telling myself I had a choice." A pause. "I did not consider that choices have consequences for everyone, not merely for me." "Why are you telling me this?" Clara said. "Because I have information about my father's land challenge that could end it," Cecilia said. "Documents he signed, correspondence with the Austrian consortium, evidence that the challenge is motivated by personal revenge rather than any legal standing." She met Clara's eyes. "I should not have it. I took it. Before I left his household. Because I was very angry about something he did, and I thought I might need it." Clara said nothing. "I will give it to you," Cecilia said. "All of it. Everything you need to end the challenge and remove my father's commission position." "In exchange for what?" Clara asked. Cecilia looked at her directly. "Nothing," she said. "That is what I need you to understand. I am not negotiating. I am trying to do something that is correct, and I have not done many correct things recently, and I require no payment for it. Clara studied her. My father used me, Cecilia said quietly. He arranged the engagement to Edmund for commercial reasons, and he arranged for Rathman to be in that library at the ball because he needed the betrothal broken so that Edmund would be weakened. He orchestrated the whole thing. I was not innocent, but I was not the only architect. Her voice was controlled and cold, the specific coldness of someone who has spent 4 months becoming very angry at someone she once trusted. He used my choices against Edmund, and he used Edmund's humiliation to build his position, and I will not allow him to profit from it any further. The tea room was quiet around them. Clara thought about the two things that are not exclusive: genuine usefulness and personal interest. She thought about a woman who had made terrible choices and was trying to make one correct one. She thought about what it cost to admit that your father had used you, and what it meant to tell the truth about that to a stranger. I will accept the documents, Clara said, and I will tell Edmund exactly what you told me. No more, no less. Cecilia reached into her reticule and produced a sealed envelope. Thick, real. She set it on the table. Tell him. She stopped. Tell him I am sorry. He will not believe it. But tell him anyway. Clara picked up the envelope. She was back at Blackmoor House before 5 o'clock. Edmund read the documents for an hour in silence. Thornton was sent for. He arrived at 6 and read them for another hour. The three of them sat in the study with the coal fire and the lamplight and the quiet urgency of something that had shifted. This is sufficient, Thornton said finally. More than sufficient. If we present this to Chair Pendleton, Vane will not merely withdraw the claim. He will resign the commission before it can be taken from him. Do it, Edmund said. Thornton departed. The study was quiet. Edmund looked at the envelope on his desk. He looked at Clara. She volunteered this, he said, yes, without negotiation. She said she wanted to do something correct. Edmund was quiet for a long time. My father and Lord Vane were friends, he said. They used to hunt together. I did not know until Cecilia told you that Vane had arranged the humiliation deliberately, that it was calculated. A pause. I knew my father was a fool. I did not know I had spent 7 years building an alliance with a man who intended to destroy it from the inside from the first moment. You could not have known, Clara said. I should have known. No one knows what they have not been told. She leaned forward slightly. Edmund, you have the documents. You have the end of the challenge. Whatever Vane intended, he failed. Edmund looked at her. His face was very controlled, but she could see beneath it. Now she had been learning to read what was beneath it for months. Because of you, he said. Because of Cecilia's choice. I only carried the letter. You convinced her. She had already convinced herself. I only listened. Clara met his gaze. You do not have to be the only competent person in the room, Edmund. You are allowed to let people help you. A long silence. Thomas said that. Edmund said, 6 weeks ago by the fishing pond. Thomas says a great deal of intelligent things, Clara said. Yes, he does. Edmund's voice was quiet. He told me last week that he wished you could be his aunt properly. Not in arrangement terms, he understands the arrangement. I believe more clearly than we gave him credit for. But permanently. Clara's breath was careful. He is 8, she said. He is very old for 8, Edmund said. You said so yourself. She looked at her hands. Clara, Edmund said. Yes, I have given you time, weeks of it. And I do not wish to push. I said I would not push, but I would like to know. When you are ready. Not because I cannot hold the uncertainty, but because he stopped, and she could see him choosing, carefully, to stop performing and simply say the thing. Because I would like to stop pretending I am not completely, thoroughly, irreversibly in love with you. The coal fire cracked. The clock on the mantelpiece marked the half-hour. Clara looked at Edmund Ashworth, who had spent 32 years choosing duty over everything, who had rebuilt a fallen dynasty with his own hands, who had noticed a governess in the back of a cathedral, and made the best and worst and most complicated decision of his life, who had shown her his father's letters and taught his ward to fish and replaced a candle bracket and said thank you to her every day in a different voice, and she felt the certainty she had been carrying for months settle finally into words. "I am in love with you," she said. "I have been for a long time, and I am not afraid of it any more." Edmund did not speak. He stood, crossed the study, took her face in both hands the way a man handles something he has been afraid he would not get to keep, and kissed her. Not tentatively, not as a transaction. With everything, all the months of careful restraint, all the candlelit evenings and fishing ponds and firelight conversations and hands held in the dark. All of it. When they separated, her hands were on his chest, and his forehead was against hers, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Thomas's voice floated down from the floor above. "Mrs. Hale says dinner is in 10 minutes. A pause. "He knows," Edmund said. "He has known for weeks," Clara said. Edmund laughed, really laughed, free and unperformed, and Clara thought that she would remember that laugh for the rest of her life. The specific sound of a man who has stopped armoring himself. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she said. "Yes," he said, "dinner." He took her hand, held it, and then, "We are going to discuss what we would like the rest of this arrangement to look like. I have some thoughts on that. I expect you do." He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was only ever for her. "I expect they are better than mine. They are different," she said. "Between the two of us, that should be enough." London, 4 months after the wedding. Vane resigned from the commission on a Thursday. It was a quiet resignation, managed through the mechanisms that powerful men use to step down from untenable positions, without destroying themselves entirely. There was no public accusation, no scandal, merely a departure, explained in the appropriate channels as a matter of health and received by those who needed to understand it as what it actually was. A man who had been shown the edge of the precipice and had chosen to step back. The Northern Land Challenge died with his commission seat. Edmund received the formal notification on a Friday morning, read it, and said nothing for several minutes. Then he went to the schoolroom and told Thomas, who received the news with the gravity of a person who understood that this represented 300 families' security. "They'll keep their land?" Thomas asked. "They'll keep their land," Edmund said. Thomas nodded. "Good," he said, and returned to his drawing. Edmund went to find Clara. She was in the library. She was always in the library when she was thinking, which was most mornings. And she looked up when he appeared in the doorway, and he held up the letter, and she understood immediately what it was. She stood. He crossed the room. She took the letter and read it. Then she folded it and looked at him. "The tenant families," she said. "All 4,000 acres secured," he said. "The northern lease arrangements intact. The trade routes negotiated on favorable terms without the Commission's interference." He paused. "Better terms than I would have achieved through the Vane alliance, as it turns out. Carey has been considerably more sympathetic than Vane would ever have been." She looked at him. He looked at her. "We should celebrate," she said. "Yes, Thomas has been asking to visit the Hertfordshire estate again." He crossed the remaining distance between them, and she leaned against him without self-consciousness, which she had been doing for 3 weeks now, and which still contained a specific wonder that she did not think she would stop feeling. He has asked whether Aristotle the toad might still be in residence. "It is November," she said. "Aristotle is almost certainly hibernating. I told him that." He said Aristotle might be waiting. "That boy," Clara said into his coat, "has an extraordinary relationship with possibility. Yes, he gets it from somewhere." She looked up. He was looking down at her with the expression she had stopped not examining. The complete, direct, unperformed expression of a man who had spent months fighting his way toward this particular truth, and had arrived at it with something that was still astonishment. She was about to say something when Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway with an expression that meant visitors of importance had arrived, and she was managing her discomfort with their timing with professional discipline. "My lord," Mrs. Hale said, "Lord Ashford is in the blue drawing room. He says it is a matter of some urgency." Lord Ashford was 72 years old, a former member of the Privy Council, and the man Edmund had described to Clara as the Crown's principal advisor on matters relating to the old landed families. He arrived with a junior secretary, refused tea, and sat with the contained, regretful manner of a man who was about to deliver news he had not been looking forward to. Edmund and Clara sat across from him. Edmund's hand, under the edge of the table, had found Clara's and was holding it. No one could see this. Clara did not move her hand. "Congratulations on the Vane resolution," Ashford said. He meant it. "The commission is considerably improved." "Thank you, my lord," Edmund said. "I have come," Ashford continued, "on a separate matter, which I want you to understand I am presenting to you with a great deal of personal regret." He looked at Edmund directly. "The Crown, His Majesty's advisers, I should say, have reviewed the circumstances of the Blackmoor Duchy's present situation, including the nature of the current marriage. And there is an interest in the dynasty's continuity that has prompted a formal request." Edmund said nothing. His hand tightened slightly on Clara's. "The request," Ashford said, "is that you consider a formal annulment of the present marriage, undertaken through the appropriate ecclesiastical channels in light of the circumstances of its formation. The Crown would be prepared to support a subsequent arrangement with a family that has existing diplomatic connections, the Wentworths specifically. Lady Karen Wentworth has been mentioned." He held up a hand. "I am aware of how this sounds. I am aware that the timing is poor. But the Crown's interest is in the Duchy's stability over the long term, and there are those who believe no," Edmund said. Ashford paused. "Your Grace, no?" Edmund said again. His voice was quiet and absolutely final. "Not a discussion, not a negotiation, no." Ashford looked at him, then at Clara, then back at Edmund. "There are consequences," Ashford said carefully. "I am required to tell you that refusal may result in a reduction in Crown favour with regard to future duchy matters. Not the northern land rights, those are settled. But future grant considerations, trade licenses, the position of, I understand the consequences," Edmund said. "Edmund," Clara said quietly. He turned to look at her. His expression was composed, but she could see beneath it. She had been reading it for months. "Let me speak," she said. He was quiet. "Lord Ashford," Clara said, turning to the older man, "I want to understand the Crown's concern precisely. Is it that this marriage is unstable, that it is likely to fail, or to damage the Duchy's reputation further?" Ashford looked at her with something that was not disrespect, despite everything. "The Crown's concern," he said carefully, "is that the marriage was entered into under unusual circumstances, and that the difference in the parties' social standing may present ongoing challenges to the dynasty's credibility." "Then let me address that concern directly," Clara said. In the 4 months since this marriage, the Northern Land Challenge has been resolved. The Commission's position on Blackmoor's trade routes has improved significantly. The household is functional, well-regarded, and stable. Thomas's guardianship arrangements are solid. She met Ashford's eyes. The concern about social standing is a real one. I am not a strategic political alliance. I am aware of that. But I am not an embarrassment to this duchy. I have not behaved as one, and I do not intend to. Ashford studied her for a moment. I am not here to question your character, your grace, he said. No, but you are here to suggest that my character is insufficient compensation for my origins. She held his gaze without aggression. It may be that some people in the Crown's circle will always think so. But those people will find it increasingly difficult to make a compelling argument against this marriage as time passes and the duchy continues to function well. The argument against it now is social. Social arguments have a half-life. Facts do not. The room was very quiet. Ashford looked at Edmund. She will make an enemy of certain people, he said quietly. She already has, Edmund said. She handles that well. A long pause. I will report to the Crown's advisers that you have declined, Ashford said. I am sorry I could not bring better news. You brought honest news, Edmund said. I prefer that. Ashford left. The house was quiet. Edmund sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose, which was a position Clara, associated with the specific tiredness that follows the discharge of a significant tension. There will be consequences, he said. Genuine ones. Not today, perhaps, but the Crown's advisers have long memories. I know, Clara said. The favor they withdraw will affect future grant applications, trade licenses for the eastern routes, things that cost the duchy real money over time. I know that too. He looked at her. And you are telling me to refuse anyway. I am telling you that I will support whatever you decide, she said. But yes, I think you should refuse. She paused. I think you have spent your entire adult life being told that the correct choice is the politically expedient one, and I think you know now that it is not always the same choice. Edmund looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up. I spent this morning reading about a land victory. That means 300 people will not lose their homes, he said. Because you told me to look at the problem from the outside. Because you listened to a woman who had betrayed me and found the good faith in it. Because you have been every good thing that has happened in this house in 4 months has passed through your hands in some way. Clara looked at him. The Crown can have its favor, Edmund said. I would rather have this. She crossed the room and sat beside him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat in the study in the quiet of a house that had become, improbably and exactly, theirs. The consequences did come, not immediately, and not catastrophically, but real. A reduced review period for the Eastern Trade License application. A cold reception from 2 commission members who has been warmed before. A brief, bruising entry in the Morning Post that referred to the Duchess of Blackmoor as the Governess elevated, and let the elevation speak for itself. Edmund read the entry, folded the paper, and said nothing. Clara read it and thought, I have been called worse things by men who mattered less. Then she went to find Thomas, who was in the schoolroom failing, apparently on principle, to understand the past subjunctive in Latin, and she sat beside him and explained it. Again, he looked at her with the focused attention he brought to everything she told him. Will this always be hard? He asked about the Latin, but with the intonation of someone asking about something larger. The hard parts get easier, she said, and then different hard parts arrive. But by then you are better at them. Thomas absorbed this. Because you have practiced being bad at hard things until you are good at them? Exactly. He returned to his Latin with the stoic determination of a boy who has decided that difficulty is not a reason to stop. Clara watched him and thought, "This is the thing I would not trade for any of it." London and Hertfordshire, 5 months after the wedding. The Hertfordshire estate in December had a particular quality of cold, clean and grey, and specific, with the frost lying heavy in the meadow grass, and the pond at the edge of the grounds, a still disk of pewter under the morning sky. Edmund stood at the study window, looking at the estate. He had been there long enough that the frost on the leaded glass had breathed itself into patterns in the corners, fern-shaped, precise. The fire behind him had burned down to a steady low pulse. Somewhere above him, Thomas was making the modest domestic thunder of a child getting dressed. He was thinking about cost, not bitterly. He had reached a point in the previous months where he could think about cost with something approaching clarity rather than grief. He had made choices that had price tags. He was paying them. Some of the prices were permanent. The Eastern trade license had been delayed by 11 months and would eventually be granted on less favorable terms. 2 commission members who had previously been cordial had become formally polite, which was its own kind of wall. Lord Ashford had sent a personal letter expressing regret, genuine regret, but regret nonetheless. These were real losses. He was not pretending they were not. And yet, he heard Clara in the corridor, the specific sound of her footsteps, which he had learned the way one learns, a voice. A handwriting, a set of small recognitions that constitute someone becoming necessary. And he turned from the window. She appeared in the doorway in her heavy winter wool, chestnut hair not yet fully dressed. Carrying a cup of something steaming, she looked at him and read his expression the way she had been doing for months, with the accuracy that had stopped startling him and begun to feel like being known. "The calculation again," she said. "Not unhappily," he said. "You're certain?" Yes, he moved toward her. I was not. In the first week after Ashford's visit, I was managing doubt. But the doubt has resolved. She handed him the cup. What resolved it? He thought about this. "Thomas," he said. "He asked me last week whether I was happy. I told him that happiness was more complicated than yes or no, and he told me that was what people say when they mean yes, but are afraid of it." Clara pressed her lips together against the thing that wanted to be a smile. "He is a deeply inconvenient child," Edmund said. "He is a wonderful child. He is both things." Edmund looked at her. "And yes. The answer is yes. Whatever the costs, I am the word is happy. I am aware that is a remarkable sentence for me to produce." She looked at him steadily. "It is not remarkable," she said. "It is simply you. It is who I was before I decided happiness was a strategic liability," he said. "You have been arguing me back toward myself for 5 months. I simply told you the truth about what I saw." "That is not a small thing," he said. "You cannot see clearly what you have not been shown." She was quiet for a moment. Looking at him with the grey eyes that had been, he now understood, reading him since the first week in the house. Reading not the performance, but the person underneath, with the patient, careful attention of someone who understood that the difference between the two was everything. "I have something to tell you," she said. He set down the cup. "Owen wrote," she said. "He has qualified. 6 months early, Dr. Webb says he is exceptional." She paused. "He wants to visit, to meet you." "I would like that," Edmund said. "He has also been offered a position in Bristol, a practice of his own, with a senior physician who will retire in 3 years. She held his gaze. He would need financial support for the first 2 years, the establishment costs. "Done," Edmund said immediately. "Edmund, done," he said again. "He is your brother, he is family." He paused. "If you are willing to consider this family." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "I have been considering it family for several months," she said. Edmund crossed the remaining distance between them and kissed her, simply and completely. In the cold morning light of the Hertfordshire study, with the frost on the window glass and the estate quiet around them. She kissed him back in the way she had since the study at Blackmoor House, not tentatively, but fully, with the warmth of someone who has stopped rationing themselves and decided to simply be present. When they separated, she stayed close, her head against his chest, and he held her with the realization, as he had every day for the last 6 weeks, that she was the best thing in his life, and he had almost missed her entirely. Thomas found them in the study at 7 o'clock. He surveyed the scene with the expression of someone whose expectations have been thoroughly met. "You are happy," he said with scientific certainty. "Go and have breakfast," Edmund said. "Yes," Thomas said serenely. "You are happy." He turned toward the door, then paused. "I was thinking," he said, without turning around, "that if Clara is the Duchess, now really the Duchess, not just in arrangement, then she is also my aunt. Really my aunt, not just in arrangement." Edmund and Clara said nothing. "I thought about this," Thomas said, "and I think that makes sense." He looked over his shoulder. "Does it make sense?" Edmund looked at Clara. Clara looked at Thomas. "Yes," she said, "it makes sense." Thomas nodded. "Good," he said, and departed for breakfast with the steady, satisfied walk of a general whose campaign has concluded successfully. Silence. "He planned all of this," Edmund said. "He has been planning this since before I was a duchess," Clara said. "Possibly since before you asked me. An 8-year-old strategic genius. He will be a formidable man," she said. "He already is." Edmund looked at the doorway Thomas had just vacated. "He is the best thing my family has produced in 3 generations. "He had help," Clara said. Edmund looked at her. "He had you," she said. A pause. "He had us," Edmund said. "That is what he had." In January, they returned to London. The social season resumed. The gossip had aged, as gossip does, and the verdict had shifted in the unpredictable way of collective London opinion. The Duchess had not collapsed under scrutiny, had not embarrassed the duchy, had in fact demonstrated a quiet effectiveness that was harder to dismiss than a dramatic failure would have been. The camp that had decided she was a scandal had been largely replaced by the camp that had decided she was an interesting phenomenon, which was considerably more livable. Diane Ashmore held a dinner at which the Blackmoor Duchess was the most sought-after conversation in the room, largely because Ashmore had made it plain that she was to be treated accordingly. Helen Hartwell had been doing a similar, quieter version of the same work for months. Clara accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had never sought it, and was reasonably certain it would pass. Lord Vane, from his quiet retirement, sent no further communications. Lady Cecilia, who had removed herself to a relative's estate in Northumberland, sent a single, brief note to Clara in February. "I am told you managed the Ashford visit well. I am not surprised. I hope you are content." C.V. Clara read it twice. Then she wrote back, briefly and without recrimination. She did not show the exchange to Edmund, and he did not ask. Some things were between women and needed to stay there. Owen arrived in March. He was 22, slight, dark-haired like Clara, with the careful manner of a young physician who has learned to hold people's health in his hands and has not yet become accustomed to the weight of it. He stood in the entrance hall of Blackmoor House and looked around at the high ceilings and the dark wood and the obvious wealth, and then looked at his sister with the expression of a young man who has several hundred questions and has decided to prioritize. "Are you well?" he asked. "Just that, yes," she said. I am. He studied her face with the diagnostic attention of someone trained to look past what people say to what they are actually showing. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied. Good, he said. Then I would like to meet the Duke. Edmund came downstairs. Thomas appeared from the schoolroom, because Thomas always appeared when something was happening, and stood on the landing with his arms folded, in a posture that was accidentally an exact replica of Edmund's default stance, and that nobody mentioned. Edmund and Owen regarded each other. I owe you a considerable debt, Owen said, with the directness of someone who has decided that courtesy is not the same as evasiveness. Your sister paid it, Edmund said. My sister doesn't do anything for free, Owen said. She pays in kind. Always has. He looked at Edmund steadily. The question is what she paid, and whether you understand the value of it. A pause. I understand it, Edmund said, more than I can express adequately. Owen looked at him for a long moment, then he said, Good, that will do. And he turned to Thomas, who was still on the landing. You must be Thomas. I have been told about you, Thomas said. Good things, I hope. Accurate things, Thomas said. Clara says accuracy is more useful than flattery. Owen, like him, he said. Everyone does, Clara said. Edmund, beside her, said nothing, but his hand found hers, and she did not look at him. And he did not need her to. And the house was full of people who had all, in their different ways, found their way toward each other. And the fire was burning in every grate, and it was March in London. And the days were getting longer. The final consequence came in April. It arrived as a formal notification from the Crown's advisory body. The Eastern trade license would be granted after review, but with a revised commission structure that reduced Blackmoor's annual trade income by approximately 1/5. Not a ruin, not a crisis, a permanent reduction. A permanent reminder of the choice he had made and the price it carried. Edmund read the notification at his desk. Then he put it in the correspondence drawer and walked to the east sitting room. Clara was there. She had her feet tucked under her on the chair, and she was reading something, and she looked up when he appeared. He said, The Eastern license decision has come. She looked at him. She knew from his face what the verdict was. 1/5 of the trade income, he said, permanently. She was quiet. The northern rents will compensate in part, he said. Carey's terms are generous enough that the net impact is manageable. Not comfortable, but manageable. Are you all right? She said. Yes, he said. Are you certain? He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her and looked at her, the woman who had arrived in his worst moment and stayed through every subsequent one, who argued theology and managed Crown functionaries and sat with him in the dark when he needed it and pushed back when he needed that instead, who had loved him back into being someone who understood what love actually was. A duchy reduced by 1/5, he said, with you in it, is a better thing than a duchy intact without you. He paused. That is not a sentiment I would have been capable of 4 years ago. It is barely a sentiment I was capable of 4 months ago. But it is true. She looked at him steadily. Thomas is going to need us to demonstrate that loss is survivable, she said. He is 8. He does not yet understand that you can lose things and still have enough. That is one of the most important things to learn. Yes, Edmund said. Then we will demonstrate it, she said simply. A long, quiet pause. Then Clara uncurled from the chair and came to sit on the arm of his and leaned against him and looked out the window at the April afternoon, where the first of the season's green was showing in the square, and she said very quietly, Thank you. For what? Edmund said. For choosing me, she said, when you did not have to. Edmund was quiet for a moment. I did have to, he said. I only did not know it yet. He held her hand. Thank you for staying when you could have left. I could not have left, she said. Why? She turned to look at him, and the afternoon light was on her face, and she said simply, because this is where I am. It was Thomas who said it first. He was in the schoolroom 3 days later, working on his Latin with the focused stubbornness he had inherited from both of the people who had accidentally raised him. Clara was at the desk. Edmund had come to look in on the lesson, a habit he had developed in the past months, and was standing in the doorway. Thomas looked up from his primer. We are a family now, he said, not as a question. As a statement of fact confirmed by observation, neither Edmund nor Clara spoke. Thomas returned to his Latin. Aristotle, the toad made it through winter, he said. He was still there by the pond when we visited in February. I checked. He was there, Clara confirmed. Things that survive winter are stronger afterward, Thomas said, with the thoughtful certainty of a boy who has been paying attention. Clara said so. Edmund was very quiet in the doorway. Clara did not look at him, but she was aware of the particular quality of his silence, not empty, not controlled, full. She said so, Edmund confirmed. Very quietly, Thomas returned to his Latin. The clock ticked, the coal fire cracked. Outside, it was April in London. The plane trees in Grosvenor Square were in new leaf, the particular young green of a season beginning. The light came through the schoolroom window, at the angle it took in spring, longer and warmer than the winter light, touching the edge of the desk and the pages of the primer, and the chestnut hair of the woman who had arrived in this house as a governess, and had stayed as something else entirely. Thomas bent over his Latin. Edmund stood in the doorway. Clara sat at the desk. The house breathed around them, steady and full. Enough. And there you have it, Edmund and Clara, Thomas and Aristotle the toad. A candle bracket that changed everything, and a fishing pond that changed everything else. I want to ask you something before you go. Was there a moment that stayed with you? The way Edmund stood at that altar and didn't move. The library at midnight, his hand over hers, neither of them speaking. The morning in Hertfordshire when Clara heard things she was never supposed to hear, and walked back through the meadow grass and sat down with 3 books she could not open. Tell me in the comments. Tell me the exact moment this story got you. I read every single one not as a courtesy, but because those comments are how I know what to write next. Your moment matters. If this story kept you company today, subscribe now. Every new story begins here, and the next one is already waiting for you. Like this video if Edmund Ashworth convinced you that the best of a person sometimes requires the worst morning of their life to arrive. And if you know someone who needs a story like this one right now, someone who is in the middle of their own worst morning, send it to them. This has been Jilted at the Altar. The disgraced Duke married his governess and defied the crown. I will see you in the next one.